This episode is brought to you by the Pelora Group.
Welcome back to Winning Through Culture.
I'm Tim Flanagan.
And I'm Amanda Kramer.
When culture's not a priority, people aren't a priority. Having an intentional focus helps you as a leader remain impactful and relevant as you move your business forward.
Welcome to Winning Through Culture. Well, welcome back to another episode of Winning Through Culture. Really excited to have Lindsey Lewis with us today. So she is the first guest in our Winning Women series, and I'm really excited to hear about her story. So just to give you a little bit of context about Lindsey, she has built her career around women and money. Not only does she help women take charge of their finances as a CHFC and also a CFP, but she also stands as a champion for diverse women in financial services in her role as executive director and chair of the American College Center for Women in Financial Services, which is just really cool. In addition to her day job, she also spearheads the Women Working in Wealth social media channels, podcasts, and exclusive events. Because of her efforts, Lewis has been honored with 2021's Investment News 40 Under 40 list and recognized as the recipient of Excel Represents Rising Star Woman in Wealth Management. She also volunteers with Savvy Ladies, which is a pro bono financial planning nonprofit, and she holds 2 degrees. So in her free time, she enjoys practicing yoga, working out, and spending time with her family as a mom of 2 kids. So welcome, Lindsey.
Thank you so much for having me. I know that my title is a mouthful.
Just a little bit, but that is representation. You might be the woman who just has it all.
Maybe.
Maybe?
You never know.
Well, we're going to explore that today.
Let's explore it.
Excellent. So it is certainly a pleasure to have you with us. And I know we've had some encounters as part of your work with the American College, which is just really cool to have someone in financial services on the podcast with us today. And we talked a little bit in your bio about how you're helping empower women. And in addition to that, you also work in the next gen space. So I just wondered, to start us off, are there any notable trends that you have really started to experience that you feel are shaping the financial services industry when it comes to being a woman in leadership or in your role as it is today?
Yeah, there are many changing demographics within financial services. A couple of big ones are the large wealth transfer that's happening. So estimated, I see so many different numbers, but somewhere between 30 trillion and 100 trillion.
It's a big range, but it's a big number.
But estimated around 30 trillion that will be in the hands of women by the year 2030. So seems really far away, but it's not.
No.
It's like half a decade
away.
Goodness. Isn't that crazy?
Yes.
So changing demographic of wealth transfer. Then also you have a big changing demographic of advisors and financial professionals in the industry at large. So Cerulli Data just put out a recent report that said 100,000 financial advisors are looking to retire in the next 10 years, which is 30 to 40% of the total financial services advisor workforce. So you see that big changing demographic. And then lastly, the U.S. is changing quite a bit. So by the year 2050, we will be a minority majority nation. And so what the client looks like today versus what the client will look like 5 years from now versus a decade from now is changing quite a bit. And this is where my passion comes into financial services, and particularly with women and underrepresented groups, is that how do we get more of those folks into roles where they're empowering the communities that they have similar lived experiences with.
Right.
And so when you look at kind of the statistics around certified financial planner professionals, or CFPs for short, the percentage of women actually has not changed in 2 decades.
2 decades?
2 decades.
Wow.
The same amount.
Okay.
Right. So we've had a lot of initiatives, and you've definitely seen a lot of forward progress with more women in different types of roles, leadership positions. But from an education aspect, to see that discrepancy, that is very fascinating. And even when you look at our institution, the American College of Financial Services, if you look at our designations, they're very similar breakdowns between men, women, in looking, not including non-binary folks in there, but it's usually about 80% male, 20% female.
Yeah.
So it's very interesting that you haven't really seen a shift in that demographic. But the data also supports that women who have designations and different emphasis within their areas of fields and expertise, they actually have increased confidence. So they're more credible, they have increased confidence, they can serve the next client face, but yet that's not happening. And so it's interesting to look at perhaps other industries that have done this successfully.
Right.
So if you look at doctors or lawyers, right? If you roll back to the 1990s, they actually started campaigns at that time to make more awareness around female doctors, right? And female lawyers. And you have roles in pop culture like Legally Blonde, where you have Elle Woods, who goes to Harvard,
Who doesn't admire Elle Woods?
Right. And we have like the big movements today with like the Barbie movie and Beyonce and Taylor and all of those things. And so how do we create pop culture and cultural experiences for financial services when I say, think of a movie that talks about finances, like what comes to mind?
No, Wolf of Wall Street, of course.
Yes.
Right.
And The Big Short.
Yeah.
Right.
Those would be the two.
Very hyper masculine movies and very inaccurate depictions of what the day-to-day of a financial professional who's helping the mass affluent market.
Right. Completely agree.
Very, very different. So that is what empowers me to keep the fight going and keep trucking along, is that we have such great data of literally a market of $100 trillion, a changing demographic, more money going into the hands of women becoming more money aware, more financially well, more financially literate. However, they're not necessarily having a financial professional that suits them.
Right.
And so that is my task and my challenge.
Right.
Getting the next generation of women within financial services.
Well, and you brought up a good point. I mean, most individuals, most consumers, I'll put them in the category of consumers, they want to work with someone or consume a product that is developed by somebody that looks like them or has a similar background or some type of affinity, something that they can relate to. So the work that you're doing is really imperative, as you talked about the amount of transfer of wealth that is going to take place into the hands of the next generation, into the hands of individuals that are in the female demographic is just mind-blowing. I cannot believe it's been 2 decades. Did I get that right? You just said that, right?
2 decades. The percentage
Wow.
of CFP professionals has not changed. And I'm very passionate about it. And I have hosted events, conferences for young women and women to be interested in financial services. So I've done it at my alma mater. I'm going into my 6th year. And so it's small. It's like a grassroots movement, but to just build awareness. Because when you think of financial services or working as a financial professional, most people just don't understand what that is. And also the trust factor. So women don't have a lot of trust in financial institutions, especially if you're looking at, Black or African American women. We did a research around their trust in financial professionals, and it is extremely low. So if they don't even have trust in a financial institution, let alone the person,
right?
We have like so many barriers and obstacles ahead of us.
Well, and oftentimes you find in the financial services industry, the client they're not buying the product. I mean, they are at the end of the day. That is a solution to a problem that they have or an issue that they're exploring, but they're buying the person. So that's interesting that you share that.
Yeah. So it's service oriented, and there have been some research studies around, if women prefer to work with a woman advisor.
Mm-hmm.
It's mixed bags, right? Some say that they prefer working with men, prefer working with women, but they really are looking for someone who's competent, and they're looking for 2 key components. They're looking for personalization and empathy. And those are 2 skill sets that women are very good at.
Yes.
Right? So I'm like, please, come.
You're like, come and join this side.
I know.
The water is fine.
I'm like, you can make great money. You can make a meaningful impact. You can have what we're going to talk about, work-life integration.
That's right. I love that term.
And you can do it all for a very long time and from home and from, all of these different ways. And you can have, the biggest factor for me is time autonomy.
Mm-hmm.
I have control over my calendar and my schedule.
Like 100% you do.
Yeah.
Which is really cool.
Other than when my toddler doesn't sleep. But.
Well, I was going to say, so we talked about the fact of like work-life or life-work integration. And I know I kind of mentioned at the beginning that you might be the one that just has it all. You do have 2 young children. Your title is a mouthful, as we discussed. You have all of these initiatives that you're working on. How do you do it?
Yeah, so I am really big into the concept I like to call becoming a village architect. So if you look at the history of the world, they always have the adage, like, it takes a village.
Yeah.
But in today's society and in modern culture, sometimes the village are going to have members who you pay for and some members that are part of your community.
Right.
So there are things that I've outsourced. And there's this amazing book called Buy Back Your Time. And it really talks about what your hourly rate is and what you could pay someone to do. So if there's something that like has to be done, but you don't love doing it, you take essentially a quarter of what your hourly rate is, and then that's what you can pay someone else to do. So I have integrated people who help come and clean my house and help do activities. I'm actually having someone come over next week that can come help me do chores and tasks and the Target runs and things like that, because I'm traveling once or twice a month and my spouse also travels. And so it's like this giant matrix of like, when are we going to see each other? What are going to happen?
Where does our quality time come into play here?
Right.
Yep.
Right. And then I am very much so very type A. So I'm big into like goals and graphs and like metrics and benchmarks, which is probably why I'm like prone to financial services. But I have this really great 3x3 matrix, and I'll make sure that I give it to you so you can
absolutely love to put it in the show notes. Yes.
Put it in the show notes. But essentially, we look at 9 dimensions of your life, which I don't have them all memorized, but a couple of them are occupational, intellectual, spiritual, emotional, environmental, and then I've integrated fun. And so I have those different buckets. And like I mentioned, some weeks you were like, I am great in the work department, but I am not great in my social department, or I'm not great in my fun department. And so you just kind of like work through that. And so being very mindful. And so I have daily just spend 60 seconds where you're just like calm, thinking about what you want to do. And then have like weekly check-ins with yourself, right? And I recently heard a quote that said, you should be working on yourself as hard as you work at your job. And so it's how much time are we putting into personal development or education or helping ourselves be better and know more about ourselves? And so I've really woven in that into my life. And then I definitely integrate, transparency. And there's some times where I'm like, okay, my mental health is not great this week and I have a lot of anxiety, but that's okay.
Yeah.
And then I chat with someone or I find some sort of resource, but really becoming that village architect and finding folks that fill those different roles. And so you have those 9 dimensions, but you also have one person who's not your spouse or partner or significant other that helps in those perspective areas too.
Okay.
So let's say physical. So it's like, I have like a trainer.
Right.
That person is also checking in on me.
You have an accountability partner that is outside of your who I would consider your person, right? So if it's your spouse or your significant, whatever you title that, it's your person. Yeah. Right.
So just making sure that you have that. And so it's taken me a long time to get to where I'm at. And I'm like, there's definitely still room for a lot of improvement, but it really has been focusing and spending more time of getting to know myself and my personal values. And so being able to say yes to things, but also being able to say no to things. And so an example of this is last week, my alma mater has a big banquet that they do for the financial planning program. And I have been the alumni president for the last number of years. And now I'm the alumni president emeritus. So I'm like taking, a little step back. And I had a lot of travel this last month and I have a lot of travel coming up. And so I ended up saying no to that. And it was really hard, but I knew that was what was going to be best for me and my family at this time. But it was really cool because the year before I had started the first iteration of what we call the 401k race. So you've heard of a 5K. So this is a 401k. So a little over 2.5 miles. And so I had started that last year. And guess what? People picked it up and they did it again this year. And they had double the people come. And it's like, great. Like you can be, one of my core values is a catalyst. Like you can be a catalyst for change, but there's things that you can outsource.
Oh, absolutely. You don't have to do it all.
Correct.
To have that impact with the surrounding community and your village, right? As you talked about it, which is just really neat.
Yeah.
That's cool. Well, you mentioned having that vulnerability in the sense of, outsourcing some things. And how do you feel maybe corporate culture has helped satiate some of those needs that we as women, so you and I together here, we can say it like that, right? Experience, because you talked about the fact you have 2 young children, you have a partner, a spouse that works outside the home as well, and then you have your list of things that you're doing. How do you feel corporate sustainability has really played a role in the ability for women to excel when it comes to roles that maybe are similar to yours?
What I have found is that financial services is one of the best places that allows for work-life integration and time autonomy for women. So I found a lot of women who will go into this industry and find independence and find that within a practice because they want to be at soccer games and ballet practices and all of those things. And so it was interesting because a couple of weeks ago, I went and spoke at an event and booked my flight home earlier, and I was able to be at my son's soccer practice that night. And there are days where my work has been very understanding and a level of grace where I'm like, hi. Yeah.
Yes.
My toddler did not. I'm like, is there a 2.5-year-old sleep regression? Because
yes, there is. There
absolutely is.
There absolutely is.
My little one, 3 a.m. every night, man, on the dot. I'm like, okay. So it's been great to work at a company that allows grace and understanding. And I recently was on a call with a woman, her name's Tama Smith, and she was talking about she had to care for ailing parents. And then her sister unexpectedly passed away and then ended up, she was taking care of her nephew as well. And so she went from being, childless by choice and breadwinner alone to now caring for 3 different individuals, and that her work works with her.
Yeah.
And I think that's what's really important about financial planning and financial services companies is that you need to have that flexibility. But I also hear firms that don't have that flexibility. And that's where you see women exiting, is that they think they're a bad fit for financial services, but they're probably just a bad fit for that firm, right? And there are other firms that would allow them to express themselves authentically, or they would be able to have the work-life integration. But I heard of this firm that they wanted to hire a lot of single moms, which is awesome. And I think it's a great field. But they had this required training, and some of the moms are like, hey, could I leave at 3:30 instead of 4 because I got to do, pick up my kid from school.
Right. And then there's after school activities and there's all the things, right?
Right. And they're like, I'll make up the 30 minutes some other time. However, they were going to dock their pay and stuff.
No.
Right. So it's like,
wow.
You have some of this forward progress, and then you hear things like that and you're like, what are we doing?
Yeah.
And I'm like, okay, maybe that's why we haven't changed in 2 decades.
Well, and it's like you take 5 steps forward and then it's like, cool, that just takes us a couple steps back and then you start over again.
Yeah.
Interesting.
That
is interesting. Well, that brings me to discussing the fact that you, as a female leader, whatever industry or team you're on or whatever you select to do with your, professional being, you have to truly look at the core values of the organization and making sure that they're not just on the wall or on the website, that they're really lived out. How have you seen some of the core values of the American college kind of align with your own and really help you propel to your stated vision that you're able to live every day?
Yeah. So the college is a very interesting place because it is what I would consider like a 100-year-old startup.
Ooh.
So we're almost to our centennial anniversary, which is in 2027. And if you go back to the inception of the college, it was really built so that there was more transparency with some of these life insurance contracts that were happening because people, guess what, exploited people in a bad way. Right. If you actually look at the history of life insurance, it is very fascinating. But that was the inception of the college. And the college has been a fertile ground for education and development. And really, we have our degrees and designation programs. And so they foster that curiosity and that learning. And I love our mission, which is to create financial knowledge that benefits society. And under our leader, George Nichols, he is totally run with that and personifies that mission. And so our core values of integrity and knowledge and innovation and all those things, those are integrated and woven into what we do. And one of the most empowering things for me is that I have male leaders, women leaders, who also champion me along the way.
Yeah. Advocacy is so important.
It is so important. I think one great example was I was teaching a CFP course and a student decided to provide some feedback, right? And they sent it to just the academics department or whatever. And it's about me and my teaching style, which, I'm a younger female financial professional, but even though I'm younger, I have the experience and the credentials needed. They wouldn't put me in a place to teach a course if I was not qualified.
Correct.
Right.
Yes.
And they send it over and it goes over to the head of the program. And he was such a great ally to me. He's like, this guy off base. And he's like, how about you send an email back and you handle it? I have full confidence in you. And it's something like that where it could have been a moment of insecurity for me,
right,
or trying to figure out and navigating, like, am I, qualified enough? And I don't like the term imposter syndrome, but because, if you listen to Reshma Shujami, it does not exist unless if we feed it, it will exist.
Yeah.
So I think that's what's been really great about the college. And I think other institutions and environments, they could adopt that where they have a level of innovation or they allow some time autonomy. And perhaps like you can't pay an individual more, but maybe you can they work a compressed schedule or fewer days, or maybe they only work when their kids are at school, or they have a flexible schedule. Like I think there's ways to create that. But that's what I found with women who are in the industry and they're thriving. They're in environments and cultures that foster that. And if they don't like that, usually they'll just start off and do their own thing, which we have a lot of independence there. But then it's really tough to be an entrepreneur as well, right? So it's like, can you create a culture, an environment as a company that allows women to thrive in that environment?
Yeah. Well, and you bring up a point around the independence that specifically being in financial services allows, right? No matter if you're male, female, whatever you affiliate as, you have that opportunity. But I think it's important to kind of peel that back just a little bit and discuss the ability in that flexibility of your schedule. What are some of the other ways in which, if you're looking at an institution, that you feel they could create an environment that not only fosters that independence, but also, and in our field, competitiveness plays a role, right? If you find a financial advisor, they have to have that drive. They have to want to keep going and push through a little bit because it's difficult at times. Like, let's just be real. It's a hard industry. So what do you find that leaders could potentially do to foster that independence and foster that empowerment, but also foster that competitiveness, but blend it so individuals can be successful?
So I'm going to start with the latter and think about the benchmarks and measuring sticks you're using, right? If it's like a straight assets under management, and a recent example of this really talented young woman advisor who wants to do a subscription base because she likes to work with Henry, so high earners, not rich yet. And the firm is like, no, we can't do subscription. And I'm like, I think your broker dealer actually has the ability to bill that way.
Right.
This individual is just telling you no.
Right.
Right. So it's like allowing different benchmarks or different measuring sticks, right? Like if assets under management is your pinnacle, but they're only charging like a very small fee or a small basis points. Like you could have as many assets under management in the world, but if you're charging like 1 basis point, you're like really not making a lot of revenue.
Right.
So is it EBITDA that you're using or revenue, or you've seen it historically where it's just like your dial and dash of like calling as many friends and family that you know, right? And it's like, this is where it gets tough for women in underrepresented groups. It's like their circle of influence as of right now, before like this wealth transfer, typically doesn't have the same level of affluence as perhaps like a white male circle of influence, right? So like people 2 distances away might have more money for a man to manage versus a woman to manage. So like even if you both made 100 phone calls, like that individual, the man might have 7 qualified leads and you might only have 4.
Yeah, it could potentially be a different outcome.
Right. So it's like if your benchmark was, did you make 100 phone calls and how many conversions do you had? Like it might feel unfair or inequity. So I have to think of it that way. And then the other part of your question is just like really thinking about how the culture and environment helps and how much overhead is your OSJ taking? And does your OSJ allow you to integrate social media? The average woman in the US spends 62 minutes a day on social media.
That's an interesting statistic. I haven't heard it said that way. Okay.
Yeah.
62 minutes.
62 minutes. So you're spending an hour. So it's like, if your clients, if I want to work with women and they're on social and my OSJ says no social, then like I'm not going to meet the benchmark.
You're shrinking your potential population that you can reach.
Exactly. So then also looking at like payout ratios or if your firm's part of protocol or not, right? So it's like, I find the firms that allow folks to leave and if they want to come back, they really foster a level of we trust you and we think you're a great person, versus sometimes I can feel some of these financial institutions are exploitative in what they do because they're like, actually, you don't own your book of business, or they don't educate folks on whether they own their book or not.
Right.
Right. And so, great example, I was out to lunch with a great individual, and the firm was like, we have this amazing offer for you, but you're going to have to relocate and you need to give your book of business to this person. And they were like, oh, this is an amazing role. I should definitely take it. But they didn't realize like their book of business was like, if they valued it, was worth millions of dollars. Right. And so they're just like, oh, this is like what we do in this firm. And it's like, no. But like, if you don't know,
if you don't know that, you don't know that
on the front end. Like, who's educating you on like, is your firm part of protocol? Like, what's the basis points? Do you have an OSJ? What's your pass-through rate?
Well, and oftentimes they don't know those questions to ask.
Well, how would you ever know
exactly?
That? I did a CFP registered program. So my undergrad is for people, ultimate like personal financial planning geeks. And I still came out of that fuzzy.
Yeah.
It wasn't until the last probably 24 months that I'm more educated about it than I ever have been. And I'm like, oh my goodness, like the mentality of like RIA or bust or assets under management. And that's the only way. It's like, wait, there are other models. There are other ways. There are ways to serve clients differently. And how do you educate those people on the front end? So I'm actually working on a course to talk about the landscape of financial services, because entering in at a wirehouse is very different than entering at a captive broker dealer versus an independent broker dealer versus at an RIA versus at a fintech firm, right? But how are you supposed to know that difference? And how are you supposed to know the compensation differences between them?
Yeah. Well, I mean, compensation differences in general is like, no matter what industry you're in,
right?
It's wild, wild west out there. So especially in financial services, having that balance of being able to have some of this knowledge, explore that in advance of having those dialogues is so important. And the level of transparency of the firm that you're willing to engage in. And that goes for not only the financial professional that's looking to enter a particular role, position, whatever terminology you want to use there, but also the client that ultimately is being served by that financial professional and institution. There's a level of transparency that I think is increasing as we move forward. Again, 5 steps forward, 2 steps back. But as we continue to evolve, it is more and more apparent of really who you are partnering with, who you are choosing to consume.
What I have really loved in this last little iteration, especially like with social media, is the democratization of that knowledge, right? It's being transparent of like asking the question of like, how is my financial professional compensated? From a client perspective, but also from when, looking at a job as a job seeker of like, how is our firm compensated? And when you're looking at aligning your personal values with firm values, like that could be one of those areas where you're like, you know what, this is a non-negotiable for me.
Yeah.
And then that would help mitigate some of the problems that incur when you end up at a firm that is a bad fit for you as an individual.
Yeah.
But someone else could thrive there.
Yeah.
Right. But for you and your lived experiences, it's not going to work.
Yeah. Well, and you mentioned the concept earlier of you say yes to one thing, you're saying no to something else.
Correct.
And the opposite is true too. And so when you get into a situation, whether you're in financial services or not, and it is not a fit for you as an individual, you have that option. You should totally trust your gut and explore that to say, I'm saying no to this because I'm saying yes to me in this scenario, which I think is empowering in and of itself. That's really cool.
Yeah. The ability to say no.
The ability to say no. Now, only if there was a course on that. Are you developing one of those?
Oh, goodness. I would not be able to. I'm a recovering people pleaser.
Okay. Same. You and I can be in that together.
I'm an Enneagram 3 recovering people pleaser. So saying no is really challenging. And I think I've always just had like this can-do attitude. I grew up, I have 6 brothers, no sisters. And so that's why I have, this is probably why I'm such a feminist, is just growing up with all those boys. But really, I can do it. If the boys can do it, I can do it. And my parents definitely raised me that way. Like any chore my brother did, I had to do.
Yeah.
Right. And so that's what I'm doing with my kiddos. But yeah, the ability to say no. Hopefully, if someone has a course, please.
Yeah, please comment below. Let us know. Lindsey and I will sign up. Yeah, we absolutely
will. Add to cart.
Yeah, add to cart. I love that. Add to cart. That's wonderful. So What advice would you give a woman who is on the rise, right? Whatever industry it is, doesn't necessarily have to be financial services, as they're looking to surround themselves with those individuals who can advocate for them. And you gave a couple examples earlier about you had the leader of your department in the college that literally took that feedback mechanism as an email and said, here, you respond. I trust you in doing this. What advice would you give women in their search to find those advocates?
Yeah, definitely with the rising leadership and rising gen, it's really important to find a good mentor, right? And it's so ambiguous, like find a mentor. So I have found it better if there's like a skill or a trait I'm trying to develop and finding someone that could help me with that. And then it creates some sort of time constraint as part of it. You could continue on. But for instance, last year I was like, oh, I really want to develop my level of strategic vision. Who in the industry do I know that does that very well?
Mm-hmm.
And then I reached out to that individual and I said, okay, I'm just looking for 3 meetings that are 30 minutes long. I'm trying to develop this skill. Could you give me that amount of time? And this person's like, absolutely, can totally do that.
Yeah.
Also, never underestimate the value that you can provide as a mentee. So sometimes they're like, oh, like, what am I bringing to the table? So if you look at a more tenured demographic or leaders, right, they might not be as good at technology. And if you're younger, right, if you're Gen Z, like you are digital versus they do digital. So like there might be ways that you can be like, hey, actually, I learned this skill in this financial planning software. I'd love to teach you as like a reverse mentorship mentality. So looking at that skill base, what's really important is that 2/3 of people think having a mentor is really important, but only 1/3 of people have a mentor, right? So there's like inertia that just happens.
Yeah.
One thing that's tricky about financial services is that, especially if you're looking for like a woman mentor within your firm, like at the firm that I started at, I was the only woman that was in advice, right? So I'm like, who am I going to sign up?
Yeah.
So I actually, I had like a male mentor in that case, but what happens is that within the organization, if women are looking for a women mentor and it's not within the organization, they're looking externally. However, an external person's not in your staff meeting saying like, oh, this person came up with a wonderful idea, right? So it is also being somewhat strategic of finding someone internally that can be a mentor for a short period of time as well, which it might be easier for some of our male listeners if like they already have like a man within there. So for women, it's just like making sure that you can find someone within the organization. Great ways for our male listeners too is to be an advocate. So reaching out, caring for that person, saying her name when she's not in the room. Also being a sponsor. Sponsor means you're writing checks. You are paying for things.
Yes.
Right? So it's like, don't make her pay for her designation. You pay for her designation because you have faith and confidence in her ability to grow and develop as a leader. And then also just being an ally and a champion. So like listening and advocating and, like I mentioned, speaking her name when she's not in the room.
Right.
Like that goes really far. So for this rising leaders, it's definitely finding a mentor, adding your value as a mentee. And then for our male listeners, right, it's being an advocate, being an ally, being a sponsor, doing all those things. And for rising leaders, also looking maybe beyond your industry. Perhaps there's another industry like financial services.
Lindsey is available.
I'm available. Find me on LinkedIn. No, but seriously, it really is a great field. And I have this idea and vision of reaching out to educators to come over to financial services. So like if you don't like your school and the process, like they've already taken exams.
Oh my gosh. It's an untapped market. Yes.
Educators.
Yes.
Next, realtors.
Oh.
Right?
Yeah.
So the average realtor is 60% of realtors are women. Majority of them have college degrees. They've taken some sort of licensure to become realtors.
Yeah, absolutely.
Directly correlated.
Yes.
To financial services. Also, they would also have a natural network.
Absolutely. They certainly would. Think about all of those connection points they have to make in order to actually successfully sell a house.
Right.
Right. Huh.
So that, and then the last one are for healthcare workers that might want to exit healthcare. They've done advanced degrees, licensure, et cetera. Yeah. They're service oriented. 60% of successful financial advisors from our research said that they got into this industry because they want to serve and help people.
Yeah.
But how many of your job descriptions are like that? Are written like, we get to help people and serve people. But no, it's like you can do linear regression or whatever. Discounted cash flows.
You're like, wait,
sophisticated asset allocation, which like
that is something that's in a textbook.
I am an investment girly all the way. But when you're looking to recruit this next generation of talent, like let's rethink how we're writing job descriptions.
Oh, that's really, wow.
Very fascinating.
Yeah, it is very fascinating.
Right. Which some people don't have control over how job descriptions, but if you are in HR at some level,
yeah, you do. You have
rewrite.
Well, the other part too is that you were talking earlier about advocacy. And even if you don't have you're not the person that makes the decision on how the job description gets written, whatever industry you're in does not matter. You still have a voice, right?
Yes.
Speak up and say in your employee engagement survey or however you provide feedback to your organization, say, this would have attracted me so much more so, or this would keep from a standpoint of retention. This is an area that I think we need to work on and develop, because if you have to advocate for yourself too. Like we talked a lot about finding that person, that one that can be an ally, the one that can be a sponsor, the one that can be an advocate. I think, at least in my lens, you can start by being an advocate for yourself. I remember the days of being the only, and I know we mentioned this on a previous podcast, but I remember the day I was the only female in that room, right? And so you have to make that choice to say, I deserve to be here and my voice matters, which clearly you have found your voice, which is awesome. I'm so grateful that you're willing to share it with us.
Yeah, it's been definitely an evolution of finding your voice. And that is where, if I know that I'm feeling angsty or something in my body, I'm like, oh, if I'm feeling like my voice is quiet, like, then I know this is like a bad fit or something's not working. And so it's also listening to, like your body and your intuition and focusing. Like, I love what you said of like becoming an advocate. And I love the tagline that I heard, right? Like you should spend as much time as you do on work on like building yourself up. And so becoming the advocate, but I wasn't always this way. If anybody knows me from junior high or high school, like I was pretty shy and quiet. I was like really good at school and I did sports all growing up. I did gymnastics 20 to 30 hours a week from age 10 to 16. Like it was a full-time job.
I was like, that's intense.
It was so intense. This is why I'm like, oh yeah, I could do plenty more because like I had 2 jobs growing up, you know? So
like, I'm good.
But really focusing on finding your voice. And that really is the hard work and really understanding your core values. And there's some amazing books out there. Some that have been really helpful for me is Designing Your Life. So looking at your life through different prototypes and developing different iterations. Like Lindsey, that first came into financial services, I would have worn a totally different outfit than what I wore today, right? I was like, gotta be buttoned up. And like now I'm like, okay, how bright of colors can I have?
I love it.
So just showing up authentically. And I think that allows other women to do that. And in a podcast that I recorded recently, they talked about, if you can see it, you can be it. But I especially love for women, if you can see her, you can be her. And so how can you be a her for someone else?
That's awesome. Well, to finish us out, one last question that I did not send you in advance, but I just wondered, are there any inspiring women that you lean into on the days that maybe you don't feel as inspired, you don't feel as bright? Is there anybody that you consistently go back to?
If we were in my office, I have like a wall of feminists behind me.
Excellent. Okay.
So I have like Ruth Bader Ginsburg on the wall. I got Angela Davis. I have Mahala. I have them all. So I have like my wall of feminists.
I like it.
I love them. But people specifically in financial services who have been very impactful for me. First and foremost, Sally Krawcheck, founder of Elevest. I just adore her. And I love her. And I love the work that she's doing and really breaking down barriers. And, nothing bad happens when women have more money. I'm like, yes, sign me up.
Yes.
Reshma Shujami that I mentioned. If you haven't watched the Imposter Syndrome commencement review, that's your homework assignment. Like go to YouTube and watch that.
Nice. I love a homework assignment on a podcast. That's great.
I know. This is my educator coming out.
Oh, I love it.
And then lastly, within the industry, I would probably say Lizetta Braxton. She's a powerhouse woman of color, and she really personifies what I think the industry could look like and be like and sound like and be comfortable for women, diverse folks, LGBTQ, next gen, you name it. And I just absolutely adore those women. And there are countless other women that are out there and my whole like squad of people in my whole village. But those are a couple of rock stars that I love and appreciate.
That's awesome. Well, Lindsey, I can't thank you enough for spending some time with us. And for those of you who have listened along, we are so empowered by the women that we get to have on this podcast. And you are one of those women. So thank you so much for being with us. And to all of our listeners, looking forward to a few more episodes highlighting women who are winning in their industries. Thanks again.
Thank you for having me.
Thanks for joining us for another episode of Winning Through Culture.
Until next time, stay intentional, be impactful,
because your culture matters.